Your name is Crix, and you have never seen the sun. This is not unusual. You were born 15 kilometers below the surface of Hive Primus on Necromunda, in a place called the Underhive, a sprawling labyrinth of collapsed structures, rusted metal, and forgotten corridors that extends deeper than anyone has ever fully mapped. Down here, in the lowest levels of the Hive City, the sun is a myth, a story told by the oldest survivors who heard it from their grandparents, who heard it from theirs. Golden light from the sky, warmth without fire, things that sound like religious fairy tales. Your world is lit by flickering lumens, ancient glow strips that fail more often than they work, and campfires that burn in rusted barrels, producing toxic smoke that adds to the perpetual haze filling the corridors. The air tastes like metal and chemicals and rot. Always. You don't know what clean air would taste like. This is all you've ever breathed. You don't remember much from your earliest years. Memories are fragmented, incomplete. You were born in a salvaged cargo container that your mother had converted into a dwelling. 3 meters by 4 meters, sheet metal walls, no windows. A blanket hanging across the entrance for privacy. Home. Your mother's name was Kelsa. You know this because your brother told you. You don't remember her face. She died when you were 3 years old. Rot lung rot, the chronic respiratory disease that kills more underhivers than violence. The air down here is poison. Breathe it long enough and your lungs fill with fluid and scar tissue. You drown on dry land. She died coughing blood into rags, unable to afford Medicaid treatment, which doesn't exist down here anyway. The upper hives have hospitals, trained doctors, medicines. The underhive has nothing. When you're sick, you either recover on your own or you die. Kelsa died. Your brother Vex was 12 when he became responsible for you. 12 years old, suddenly parenting a 3-year-old in the most hostile environment humanity has ever created. He did his best. Fed you protein paste, a grey, tasteless substance made from recycled organic matter that you don't want to think about too carefully. Kept you hidden when gang violence erupted in the corridors. Taught you to stay quiet when strangers passed. Taught you that trust outside family is how you die. Vex was already in a gang by then. The Bloodied Claws. One of hundreds of gangs that control the Underhive's territories. It wasn't a choice he made freely. The Underhive offers 3 paths. Join a gang and have some protection, some share of resources, some sense of community. Work for the guilders who control trade and production, laboring in conditions that make gang life look merciful. Or try to survive alone, which means dying slowly of starvation or quickly from violence. Vex chose gangs. He was practical, smart. He understood that survival in the Underhive requires numbers, strength, territory, things a 12-year-old alone with a toddler brother didn't have. The Bloodied Claws controlled the territory called the Rust Warrens. 3 square kilometers of collapsed structures, salvage yards, and fungus farms that constituted their domain. They weren't the biggest gang, weren't the most violent. Just one of dozens fighting for resources in the endless darkness. You grew up on the edges of that gang, not quite a member, but under their protection, because Vex was one of them. You learned the geography of the Underhive the way children in other worlds learn to read. The Rust Warrens were safe, relatively. The territories surrounding you belonged to rivals. The Corrosion Boys to the east, the Skinner crew to the west, the Rust Eaters to the north, cross into their territory without permission, and you'd be killed. Simple as that. Territory is everything down here. Resources are limited. Every water source, every fungus farm, every salvage site is contested, defended, worth dying for, worth killing for. The boneyards were neutral ground, a massive ossuary where the dead were laid out for processing by the corpse guilders. All gangs respected the neutrality, not out of morality, but practicality. Everyone needed the corpse guilders to dispose of bodies, to render them down into protein that would feed the next generation. Disrupt that system, and everyone suffered. You learned these rules before you learned to read. Territory, respect, violence. The fundamental laws of Underhive life. By age 6, you were running messages for the bloodied claws. Gang runners are children, too young to be threats, beneath notice of most gangers. You'd carry folded papers or memorized verbal messages between different squad leaders, between allied gangs, sometimes even into neutral territory for negotiations. It was dangerous work, children died doing it, but it was necessary, and it taught you the Underhive's layout better than any map. You learned which corridors were safe at which times, where ambush points existed, which territories had truces and which were active war zones. You learned to read people, to identify gang affiliations by clothing, by tattoos, by the weapons they carried. The bloodied claws wore red fabric scraps tied around their arms. The corrosion boys had green face paint. The Skinner crew wore leather made from... You didn't ask what it was made from. Better not to know. You learned to move quietly, to be invisible, to run fast when necessary. The Underhive is vertical as much as horizontal. Collapse levels, makeshift stairs, climbing routes between floors. You learned them all. Your small size was an advantage. You could fit through gaps adults couldn't, escape through routes that larger gangers couldn't follow. Vex taught you personally. Never trust anyone outside the gang, he'd say. Never show weakness. Never hesitate when you need to run. Speed keeps you alive down here. Speed and knowing when to be invisible. You trusted Vex completely. He was your only family, your only constant in a world of chaos and violence. He fed you, protected you, taught you to survive. He was 17 by then, ancient by Underhive standards, a veteran. He'd survived 5 years in the bloodied claws. Most didn't make it that long. You'd watch him with his crew, 6 gangers, ages 13 to 19, all hard-minded and scarred. They moved with casual violence, weapons always ready, watching every shadow. They'd laugh sometimes, share stories, mock each other. There was camaraderie there, brotherhood. But it was brotherhood built on shared violence, shared survival. They'd kill for each other. They die for each other. Because alone in the Underhive, you're prey. Together, you're a threat. You were 8 years old when you witnessed your first gang war. Not a skirmish, not a border raid. An actual, sustained gang war. It started over water rights. A processing station in the border territory between the Rust Warrens and the Acid Flats. Corrosion Boys territory. Both gangs claimed salvage rights to the machinery. Negotiations failed. Someone threw the first punch. Then someone pulled a knife. Then guns came out. It escalated in hours. What should have been a territorial dispute between squads became an all-out war involving dozens of gangers from both sides. You were in your dwelling, the cargo container you called home, when the shooting started. The sound was unmistakable. Autoguns, stub pistols, shotguns, all firing at once. The corrugated metal walls did nothing to stop the noise. The entire structure shook with impacts. Vex shoved you into the back corner. Stay down, don't move, don't make a sound. Then he grabbed his autogun and ran outside. You stayed, curled in the corner, hands over your ears, trying to block out the sounds. The gunfire, the shouting, the screaming. The wet impacts of rounds hitting flesh, the crashes as structures collapsed. It lasted 3 hours. 3 hours that felt like days. 3 hours of constant violence, just meters from where you hid. When the shooting finally stopped, the silence was worse. You heard moaning, crying. Someone begging for help in a voice that got weaker and weaker until it stopped. Vex came back covered in blood. Not his blood. He'd killed 2 corrosion boys, he'd told you. Shot them both at close range. You looked at your brother and saw someone different. The violence had changed him. His eyes were harder, colder. He'd crossed a line you couldn't see but could sense. He'd become what the Underhive required him to be, a killer. It's over, he said. We held the territory. Stay inside tonight. Don't go out for any reason. You obeyed. Through the cracks in the wall, you could see bodies in the corridor outside. 9 dead total. 5 corrosion boys. 4 bloodied claws. They lay where they fell, cooling in the chemical haze. By morning, they were gone. Not removed by gang members, not processed by corpse gilders, just gone. You learned later that the desperate had come in the night. The people even below gang members in the hierarchy, the ones so hungry they'd lost all shame, and harvested the bodies. For meat. This was normal. This was the Underhive. Nothing was wasted, not even the dead, especially not the dead. Protein is protein. The desperate don't have the luxury of being squeamish. You vomited when you learned this. Vex didn't comfort you, just said, "That's the Underhive. Remember it. Let it make you hard. Soft people die down here." Age 9, you started weapons training. Not formal training, there was no such thing. Just Vex showing you how to hold a knife properly, how to thrust, not slash. Where to aim on a human body to cause maximum damage. Throat, eyes, kidneys, femoral artery, places that turned humans into corpses. "You're going to join the gang," Vex told you. "Not because I want you to, because you have to. You're almost old enough. They'll initiate you soon. When they do, you'll need to be ready. Ready for what? To kill someone." The words hung in the recycled air. You were 9 years old, and your brother was telling you that soon, very soon, you'd be required to take a human life. To prove yourself worthy of gang membership, to demonstrate you had what it took to survive in the darkness. You wanted to refuse, wanted to say you couldn't do it, wanted to believe there was another path. But you'd lived in the Underhive your entire life. You'd seen what happened to people outside gang protection. You'd seen children younger than you, alone, starving, sometimes with wounds that would never heal because Medicaid treatment didn't exist for them. The gangs were brutal, violent. They'd work you until you broke, send you into danger without hesitation, use you as cannon fodder in territorial disputes. But they fed you, protected you, gave you a community, twisted and violent as it was. Without them you had nothing. You were nothing. "Okay," you said quietly. "I'll be ready." Vex nodded. Didn't smile. Didn't reassure you. Just nodded like you'd agreed to a contract. Which, in a way, you had. A contract written in blood, for payment in survival, in a place where both were cheap. That night, you lay in the darkness of your cargo container home, listening to the sounds of the Underhive. Distant gunfire, screaming, the drip of toxic water through corroded pipes, the skittering of rats, actual rats, not mutated, just surviving, like everything else down here. You thought about the future Vex described. Joining the gang, killing, fighting, dying young in some pointless territorial dispute. This was your inheritance, your destiny, the only path forward in the darkness. You were 9 years old and your childhood was already over. In the Underhive, it had been over since birth. You'd just been too young to understand. Now you understood, and understanding changed nothing. The darkness didn't care about understanding, it just consumed. You, your brother, everyone, always, forever. You fell asleep, listening to distant gunfire, and you dreamed of things you'd never seen. Sunlight, clean water, open sky. Dreams that felt like memories of another life. A life that had never existed. A life that never would. In the morning, the dreams were gone. Only the darkness remained. Only the Underhive. Only survival. Always. Age 10, your initiation day arrived without ceremony or warning. You were in the gang's common area, a cleared section of corridor where the bloodied claws gathered, when the gang leader, a scarred veteran named Cross, pointed at you. "Time," he said. Just that one word. Everyone knew what it meant. Vex put his hand on your shoulder, squeezed once, then let go. No words, no encouragement. This was something you had to do alone. They walked you deeper into the rust warrens, into a section of collapsed industrial structure that formed a natural amphitheater. 20 gang members formed a circle. In the center, a corrosion boy, maybe 16 years old, bound and kneeling. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. He'd been captured during a border skirmish 3 days ago. Cross handed you a knife, rusted, old. The blade was notched from use, the handle wrapped in dirty cloth. It was heavier than you expected. "Kill him," Cross said. "Prove you're one of us." The corrosion boy looked at you. His visible eye was wide with terror. He was trying to speak through the gag in his mouth, pleading sounds. Desperate. He was 16. You were 10. He probably had family, people who'd miss him, a life such as it was in the Underhive, that he wanted to keep living. You stood there, knife in hand, frozen. Every instinct screaming at you to refuse, to throw down the knife, to run. You were 10 years old. This was murder. Calculated, cold-blooded murder of someone helpless. "Do it," Vex said from the circle. His voice was hard, not because he wanted you to kill, because he needed you to survive, and survival required this. Don't think, just do it. The corrosion boy was shaking his head, tears running down his face, making sounds that might have been words, if not for the gag. Your hands were shaking. The knife felt wrong, too heavy, too real. This wasn't self-defense, wasn't survival. This was execution, ritual murder to prove your worth to people who'd normalized killing. But what choice did you have? Refuse and you'd be cast out. No gang protection, no share of resources, death, slower, but just as certain. And Vex would be punished too. Shamed for failing to prepare you. Maybe killed for wasting the gang's time with a coward brother. You stepped forward. The corrosion boy tried to scramble backward but couldn't. His hands were bound behind him. You grabbed his hair, pulled his head back, exposing his throat like Vex had taught you. The knife went in, badly. You didn't have the strength to cut deep enough on the first try. The blade caught on something. Cartilage, maybe. The corrosion boy made a terrible sound through the gag, not a scream. Worse than a scream. A choking, gurgling noise that would haunt you for years. You pulled the knife out. Blood poured from the wound. Not the quick death you'd hoped to give him. You'd cut wrong. Hit something that bled heavily, but didn't kill fast. "Finish it," Cross ordered. You stabbed again, and again. Frantically now, not trying for precision, just trying to make it stop. Make the sound stop. Make the dying stop. But it took minutes. Long, horrible minutes while the corrosion boy bled and choked and died slowly in front of you. When he finally stopped moving, you were covered in his blood. Your hands, your face, your clothes, hot and sticky and smelling like copper. You vomited, dropped the knife and vomited onto the rusted metal floor, your body rejecting what you'd just done, your stomach trying to purge the horror. The gang members laughed, not cruel laughter, almost fond. They'd all been through this. They all remembered their first kill. How clumsy it was, how awful. Cross slapped your back hard enough to knock you forward. "Welcome to the bloodied claws, little brother. You're one of us now." You couldn't speak, couldn't process what you'd done. You'd just killed someone, murdered a teenager who'd done nothing to you personally, killed him slowly and badly because you were too small and weak to make it quick. Vex pulled you aside after, helped you clean the blood off, didn't say anything for a long time. Then, it gets easier, not better, easier. The first one is always the worst. I murdered him. You survived. That's what matters down here. Morality is a luxury for the upper hives. We don't have luxuries. You wanted to argue, wanted to say that murder was wrong regardless of circumstances. But you looked around at the Underhive, at the darkness, the poverty, the constant violence, and you couldn't find the words. Because Vex was right. Morality was a luxury, and you had none. Your first gun came a month later. A stubber revolver, ancient and barely functional. The barrel was pitted with rust. The cylinder stuck sometime. The sights were misaligned, but it was yours. Vex taught you to maintain it. How to clean it with chemical solvent and cloth. How to load the heavy slugs it fired. How to aim, accounting for the misaligned sights. How to not get killed by the unreliable mechanism. Sleep with it, he told you. Never let it out of reach. Down here, you're only as safe as your fastest draw. You followed his advice. The revolver became an extension of you. You carried it everywhere, slept with it under your bedroll, checked it constantly. Your life depended on it functioning when needed. The Underhive's dangers weren't just rival gangs. There were other threats, things that lived in the deep darkness. The unmapped sections of the Underhive where even gangs didn't venture. Mutants. Humans twisted by radiation, by toxic chemicals, by the countless pollutants that saturated the Underhive's environment. They lived in the deepest levels, in places where the air was barely breathable, where the darkness was absolute. Sometimes they ventured up into gang territories, hunting, scavenging, taking the unwary. You'd seen one once, age 11. You were on watch duty at the edge of Bloodied Claws territory when you heard something moving in the darkness beyond the lumen lights. Something large, heavy, breathing in a wet, labored way that sounded wrong. You raised your revolver, aimed at the sound, waited. It came into the light slowly, what had been human once. Male, you thought, but twisted. One arm was grotesquely overdeveloped, the muscles bulging with tumors. The other arm was withered, its face was wrong, features in the wrong places, extra eyes that didn't focus properly, mouth too wide, filled with broken teeth. It saw you, made a sound, half human scream, half animal growl, charged. You fired, 3 times. The revolver's heavy slugs punched into its chest. It stumbled, kept coming. You fired again, headshot. The creature collapsed 3 meters from you, twitched, and went still. Other gangers came, running at the sound of shots. Found you standing over the corpse, shaking. They examined the body with professional detachment. Deep dweller, one said. Probably came up hunting rats. Good kill, kid. But check your territory more carefully. Where there's one, there's usually more. They were right. 2 nights later, another attack. A pack of mutants, 5 of them, trying to drag away a young ganger on watch. The resulting fight killed 2 mutants and wounded the ganger badly enough that he died of infection 3 days later. The Underhive had layers of predators. Gangs were just one layer. Below them, sometimes literally below, in the deepest levels, things worse than humans survived. Things that had given up on humanity entirely, descended into animal instinct and desperation. Age 13, the worst year of your life, the year Vex died. It was an ambush, routine territorial patrol along the border with Corrosion Boy's territory. Vex was leading his squad, 6 gangers including you. You'd been part of his squad for 3 years by then. Trusted, competent, a good shot with your revolver despite its flaws. The Corrosion Boys hit you from 3 angles simultaneously. They'd planned it carefully, waited for Vex's squad specifically. They wanted revenge for territorial losses, for past humiliations, for the constant grinding violence of gang rivalry. The first shot hit the ganger to your left. Headshot. He dropped instantly. The second shot killed another before anyone could react. Then it was chaos. Gunfire from multiple directions. No cover nearby, just open corridor. Dex was shouting orders, trying to organize a fighting withdrawal. You were firing at muzzle flashes, not really aiming, just trying to suppress the attackers long enough to retreat. Then Vex stumbled. You turned, saw the blood spreading across his chest. A shotgun slug, probably. Close range, massive damage. He tried to speak, coughed blood instead. You grabbed him. Tried to drag him to cover. He was too heavy. You were 13, he was 18. You didn't have the strength. The other gangers were retreating, fighting backward, laying down covering fire, calling for you to move. You couldn't leave Vex. He grabbed your arm. His grip was weak, his voice was barely a whisper. Take care of the crew. Then he died. Just stopped. One moment alive, the next moment gone. The brother who'd raised you, protected you, taught you everything you knew about surviving the Underhive. Dead on the corroded metal floor. You wanted to stay, to die there beside him, but the surviving squad members grabbed you, physically dragged you away while you screamed. Saved your life by forcing you to leave your brother's corpse behind. The corrosion boys took it, desecrated it, left pieces of Vex in the border territories as a warning. You found his head 3 days later, mounted on a spike. The rage you felt was absolute, all-consuming. You wanted to kill every corrosion boy, to burn their territory, to make them suffer the way you were suffering. But you were 13, and you just inherited responsibility for Vex's squad. 6 gangers, ages 11 to 17, all looking to you for leadership because everyone older was dead. You were a child leading children in an endless gang war in the darkness, 15 kilometers below a city that didn't know you existed. You couldn't afford rage, couldn't afford grief. You had to be what the squad needed, a leader, cold, calculating, willing to make the hard decisions that kept them alive. So you buried the grief, locked it away somewhere deep, became what the Underhive required, became what Vex had been. A killer, a survivor, a leader of killers. His last words became your purpose. Take care of the crew, keep them alive for however long possible, in the darkness, forever. The territorial conflicts continued. They never stopped. Resources in the Underhive were finite. Water sources, fungus farms, salvage sites, routes to the upper hive markets. Every gang needed them. Every gang fought for them. You fought for a water processing station, for a collapsed warehouse full of salvageable materials, for a fungus farm that produced barely enough food to feed your squad. You killed for these things, bled for them, watched your squad members die for them. Age 14, you killed your 5th person. Age 15, your 12. You knew each one's face, remembered them. The first few haunted you, their expressions, their final moments, the knowledge that you'd ended their lives. After 5, they started to blur together. After 10, you stopped counting. They became necessary, automatic, just another part of survival. You were 15 years old and you were a killer. Not a soldier. Soldiers fight wars with purpose. You were just a ganger fighting for resources in the darkness, killing people as desperate as you, dying for territory that didn't matter to anyone except the gangs who fought over it. The upper hive didn't care. 15 kilometers above you, in the gleaming spires where the nobility and guilders lived, they didn't even think about the Underhive. You weren't citizens to them. You were vermin. Problems to be occasionally culled when you became too numerous or too bold. Sometimes enforcers descended from the upper levels for compliance sweeps. They'd cordon off sections of the Underhive and kill indiscriminately. Gangers, civilians, children. Didn't matter. They'd rack up body counts, report them as criminal elements eliminated and return to the surface, leaving corpses for the corpse guilders, leaving survivors more desperate and violent than before. You survived 3 compliance sweeps, lost squad members in each one, learned to recognize the signs, increased upper hive traffic, unusual enforcer presence in the mid-hives, and hide when they came. Let them kill other people, survive by being invisible, by being lucky. Luck was a finite resource. You knew that. Everyone's luck ran out eventually in the Underhive. You were just trying to extend yours. Extend your squads. For one more day, one more week, one more month. That was the scope of planning in the Underhive. Not years, not futures, just the immediate present, just survival. You were 15 years old and you'd already given up on living past 25. Age 16 brought new responsibilities and new horrors. The gang needed funds. Protection from other gangs wasn't free. Weapons, ammunition, basic supplies, all cost. The Bloodied Claws, like every gang, had to generate income somehow. The Corpse Guilders approached with a contract. They needed harvesters for a plague zone, a section of the Underhive where disease had broken out and killed hundreds. Bodies needed collection before they contaminated water sources or bred worse plagues. It was dangerous work, disgusting work, but it paid in food, ammunition, and the guild's favor, valuable currency in the Underhive. You and your squad took the contract. You needed the resources, needed the guild connection, needed everything the job offered, despite knowing exactly how terrible it would be. The plague zone was 3 kilometers into disputed territory, a collapsed residential section where thousands had lived in desperate poverty until disease swept through. The Corpse Guilders provided basic protective gear, cloth masks soaked in chemical treatment, gloves that were more whole than material, goggles with cracked lenses. Inadequate protection, but better than nothing. The bodies had been dead for weeks. The smell was indescribable. Decomposition in the Underhive's warm, human environment accelerated. By the time you arrived, many corpses were barely recognizable as human, bloated, splitting, releasing fluids and gases that made you gag, even through the chemical-soaked mask. Your job was simple. Drag the bodies to collection points where Corpse Guilder servitors would load them onto carts. Destination: the corpse starch processing plants. The bodies would be rendered down, bones, organs, everything, into protein paste that would feed the Underhive's population, the cycle of life in the darkness. Humans eating humans, filtered through industrial processing and denial. You worked 12-hour shifts, dragging bodies, stacking them, trying not to think about what you were doing, trying not to breathe too deeply, trying not to remember that these had been people, citizens of the Underhive like you. They'd had names, lives, families. Now they were raw material for protein production. Some of the bodies weren't fully dead. The plague created zombies, people whose brains were destroyed by disease, but whose bodies continued moving, mindless, aggressive. They'd attack anything living. You had to put them down, shoot them, burn them, make sure they were truly dead before collection. A kid from your squad, a boy named Jax, 11 years old, new to the gang, got careless, thought a body was dead when it wasn't. The plague zombie grabbed him, bit him. Deep bite on the arm, drew blood. You knew what that meant. So did Jax. The plague transmitted through bodily fluids. He was infected, dead, just delayed. He turned into one of those things within days. He looked at you with terrified eyes. "Fix it, please. There's got to be something." There wasn't. No cure, no treatment. The upper hives had medical facilities that might have helped. The Underhive had nothing. Once infected, you turned, inevitably. You pulled your revolver. Jax saw. Started backing away. "No, no, please. I can fight it. I can..." "You can't," you said. Your voice was flat, emotionless. You'd learned to lock emotion away when doing terrible things. "I'm sorry." You shot him, clean headshot. He dropped, dead before he hit the ground. Mercy, such as it existed in the Underhive, quick death, instead of slow transformation into a mindless thing. The other squad members watched, said nothing. Jex had been with you for 6 months. He'd been a good kid, fast, brave, learning the life. Now he was another corpse for the corpse guilders. He didn't even remember his full name, just Jex, 11 years old, dead because he got careless, because the Underhive punished mistakes instantly and without mercy. That night, back at the gang's common area, you realized you hadn't felt anything when you killed him. No grief, no horror, no hesitation, just cold calculation. He was infected, he'd turn. Better to end it quick. Necessary action. You were 16 years old, and you'd killed a child without feeling anything. The Underhive had completed your transformation. You'd become exactly what it required, a survivor so hardened that even murdering kids was just another task. You hated what you'd become. You did it anyway, because the alternative was dying. And despite everything, despite the horror and violence and endless darkness, you weren't ready to die. Not yet. The Plague Zone contract took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of dragging rotting corpses, 6 weeks of dodging plague zombies, 6 weeks of working in conditions that would have killed softer people. But you weren't soft. None of you were. The Underhive had burned softness out of you years ago. The payment was good. Food supplies for 3 months, ammunition for your squad's weapons, a favor owed by the corpse guilders, valuable currency in the Underhive's economy, and something else. Respect. Other gangs knew the Blooded Claws had completed a Plague Zone contract, knew you were hard enough, desperate enough, or crazy enough to do that work. It gave you reputation, made rival gangs more cautious about attacking your territory. Reputation mattered. In the Underhive, where formal law didn't exist, reputation was law. If people believed you were dangerous, willing to do anything, impossible to intimidate, they avoided conflict with you, respected your territory, paid tribute rather than fighting. Reputation saved lives by preventing violence. You cultivated that reputation deliberately, made sure stories spread about your squad's ruthlessness, about the Plague Zone work, about the corrosion boy you'd captured and tortured for information. You hadn't enjoyed it, but you'd done it thoroughly and made sure witnesses survived to tell others. About your willingness to escalate conflicts beyond what rivals expected. It was manipulation, strategic violence, psychological warfare. You were 17 years old, and you'd learned to weaponize reputation as effectively as you weaponized guns. You'd never been above the Underhive. Never even tried. The upper levels were controlled by guild enforcers, hired security, and the Arbites. If Underhivers were caught in the upper levels without authorization, they were shot on sight. No trial, no questions, just execution. But you'd heard stories. The older gangers, the ones who'd somehow survived into their 30s, sometimes talked about the upper hive. Clean water that didn't taste like rust, real food, not protein paste, but actual plants, grown in hydroponics. Meat from animals instead of rendered corpses. Light, natural light from actual lumen strips that functioned properly, creating brightness you could barely imagine. It sounded like myths, like religious stories about paradise. You didn't believe most of it, couldn't believe it. Your entire world was darkness, chemical fires, toxic water, and protein paste. The idea of something better seemed impossible. But sometimes, late at night, you'd imagine it. What it would be like to drink clean water, to see clearly without chemical haze obscuring everything, to breathe air that didn't burn your lungs, to live somewhere that wasn't constantly trying to kill you. Then morning would come, the reality of the Underhive would reassert itself, and you'd lock away those fantasies, because fantasies didn't help, didn't change anything. You were born in the Underhive, you'd die in the Underhive. The upper levels might as well be another planet for all the chance you had of reaching them. Your universe was 15 kilometers of darkness. That was all. That was everything. That would always be everything. Age 18, you were a veteran. You'd survived 8 years as an active gang member. You'd seen most of your original squad die. Vex was long dead, the 6 gangers he'd led when you were 13. 4 dead now, only 2 remained, both older than you. They followed your lead without question. You'd proven yourself. Proven you could keep people alive, at least keep them alive longer than most. You'd recruited younger kids to replace the dead. That's how gangs sustained themselves. Constant recruitment. Children as young as 8 being integrated into the life. Taught to fight, taught to kill, groomed for violence. You hated it. Hated taking kids and turning them into what you'd become. But you did it anyway, because the alternative was letting your squad dwindle to nothing. Becoming vulnerable, losing territory, dying faster. So you recruited, found kids without families or protection, kids starving, desperate, willing to trade their childhood for survival. You gave them the same speech Vex had given you. Stay sharp, trust the crew, follow orders. The Underhive kills the careless. Don't be careless. You taught a 10-year-old how to strip an autogun, how to maintain it, how to clear jams, how to shoot straight. You taught him knowing you were preparing him to kill, knowing you were perpetuating the cycle that had destroyed you. His name was Rake, skinny, quick, scared of everything but trying to hide it. He reminded you of yourself at that age, same desperation, same attempt at bravery while terror lurked beneath. "Will I have to kill someone?" he asked one day during training. You wanted to lie, wanted to tell him no, that wouldn't be necessary, that he could survive without murder. But you'd learned not to lie to your crew. Lies got people killed. Truth was cruel, but honest. "Yes," you said, eventually. "When you're ready, when the gang needs you to prove yourself, you'll kill someone." "What if I can't?" "Then you'll die. Or be cast out, which is the same thing down here." I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's reality. The Underhive doesn't care about right, only about survival. Rake was quiet for a long time. Then, "Did you have to kill someone?" "Yes, when I was 10. A captured corrosion boy. I did it badly. He died slowly. It was the worst thing I'd ever done. Still is, probably. But I did it, and I survived. And that's why I'm here teaching you instead of rotting in some forgotten corridor. Do you regret it?" You thought about that every day. But regret doesn't change anything. Doesn't bring him back. Doesn't make me less of a killer. It just exists. Like everything else down here, heavy and unavoidable. You didn't tell him the rest. Didn't tell him that after the first kill, others came easier. That you'd stopped counting after 12. That you'd killed people in their sleep, in ambushes, in fair fights and unfair ones. That you'd become efficient at murder. That it barely registered anymore. He'd learn that himself, if he survived. Age 19. A bad year. Territorial disputes escalated into sustained gang war. The Rust Eaters encroached on Bloodied Claw's territory, trying to claim a valuable salvage site. The resulting conflict lasted 3 months. Dozens died on both sides. Your squad lost 2 members, including one of the last veterans from Vex's original crew. You killed 7 people during that conflict, maybe more. It was hard to keep track in sustained combat. Bodies piled up. You stopped caring who they were. Just enemies. Obstacles. Threats to be eliminated. The Blooded Claws won the conflict, held the territory, but the cost was brutal. The gang was smaller, weaker, more vulnerable. Other rivals smelled blood, tested your borders, probed for weakness. You were 19 and exhausted, not physically. Your body was hard, conditioned by years of violence, but mentally, spiritually. You'd been fighting for 9 years. You'd lost count of the dead, lost count of your own kills. You barely remembered who you'd been before the gang life. That 10-year-old boy who'd cried after his first kill seemed like a different person entirely. Maybe he was. Maybe that boy had died and something else had taken his place. Something harder, colder, more efficient at survival, less human. Page 20. You were ancient by Underhive standards. Most gangers died by 19 or 20. You'd outlived most of your generation. The oldest ganger you knew was 36. A scarred veteran named Torque, who'd somehow survived 2 decades of gang life. Everyone treated him like a living legend. Impossible survival. Mathematical improbability given flesh. You wondered if you'd make it that far. Doubted it. Your luck would run out. Everyone's luck ran out eventually. Violence, disease, accidents, starvation. The Underhive offered countless ways to die. Survival was just postponing the inevitable. You didn't fear death anymore. You'd been intimate with it for too long, seen too many people die, killed too many people yourself. Death was familiar, expected, almost welcome. At least it meant rest. An end to the constant vigilance, the endless violence, the grinding horror of existence in the darkness. But you weren't ready yet. Your squad depended on you. Rake and the other younger members needed your experience, your knowledge, your protection. You'd stay alive for them, for however long possible. Because that's what Vex would have wanted. That's what you'd promised in your brother's last moments. Take care of the crew. The words echoed across years. Your purpose, your burden, your reason for surviving in a place that offered no other reasons. You were 20 years old and you'd already lost everything except duty. It would have to be enough. Page 21. The weight of it all finally broke through your carefully maintained numbness. You'd been hard for so long, cold for so long, that you'd almost convinced yourself you didn't feel anymore. That the Underhive had burned out all emotion except the animal survival instinct. You were wrong. It started with a child. Not a gang member, just a civilian kid, maybe 5 years old, caught in crossfire during a border skirmish with the Skinner crew. A stray round from someone's autogun. You never knew whose, caught her in the chest. She died instantly. Probably didn't feel anything. Her mother's screaming did something to you. Broke through the armor you'd built around yourself. The woman was kneeling in the corridor, holding her dead daughter, screaming at everyone and no one. At the gangs, at the Underhive, at the Imperium, at the God Emperor who supposedly watched over humanity, but who'd never once looked down at the darkness 15 kilometers below the surface. She was 5, the woman screamed. 5 years old and you killed her. For what? For territory? For pride? She wasn't even in your war and you killed her. No one answered. What could you say? She was right. The child had been caught in violence that didn't concern her. Collateral damage in an endless gang war over resources so minimal they barely mattered. Dead because gangs fought and civilians suffered, and that was just how the Underhive worked. The Skinner crew retreated. The skirmish ended. The territory dispute was unresolved. The child was still dead. Everything was exactly as it had been, except one family had been destroyed. You walked away from the scene and found yourself in a forgotten corridor, alone, and you realized you were a monster, not metaphorically, actually. You'd killed dozens of people. You'd trained children to kill. You'd perpetuated a cycle of violence that consumed generation after generation. You were as much a victim of the Underhive as anyone, but you were also an active participant in its horror. You made it worse. You killed. You recruited killers. You fought for territory that didn't matter while civilians died around you. The Underhive had made you this way. but you'd chosen to continue being this way. Every day you woke up and strapped on your weapons and led your squad into violence. You chose it. You could have refused, could have left the gang, could have died, yes, but died refusing to perpetuate the cycle. But you hadn't. You'd survived. And survival required becoming exactly what the Underhive needed you to be. A killer. A monster. A cog in the machine of endless violence. You sat in that forgotten corridor for hours, processing this realization. The weight of all the dead pressing down on you. The faces you remembered. The corrosion boy you'd killed at age 10, Jax the plague victim, the 7 people from the Rust Eater War, countless others whose names you'd forgotten or never known. You were 21 years old, and you'd spent more than half your life killing. You would die a killer. You'd never be anything else. The Underhive didn't allow redemption, didn't allow change. Once you were in the cycle, you were in it until death. That night, you returned to the gang's common area. Rake approached you. He was 13 now, had been with you for 5 years. He'd made his kill 2 years ago, proven himself, become a full member of the Bloodied Claws. You trained him well. He was fast, smart, ruthless when necessary, a good ganger. A good killer. "Boss," he said. "You okay? You look weird." "I'm fine," you lied. "Just tired." "Yeah, the Skinner thing was rough. Did you hear about the civilian kid who—" "I was there." "Oh," Rake shifted uncomfortably. "That sucks. But it happens, right? Civilians get caught sometimes. Not our fault." "Not our fault." The words hung in the recycled air. Technically true, you hadn't fired the shot that killed her, but you'd been part of the conflict. Part of the violence that made such deaths inevitable. How many civilians had died because of gang wars you'd participated in? Dozens? Hundreds? "Yeah," you said quietly. "It happens." Rake left. You sat alone, cleaning your revolver, the same weapon you'd had since age 10, maintained meticulously, still functional despite its age and wear. How many people had you killed with this gun? You'd lost count. The weapon was just metal and mechanics. It didn't care. It just functioned. Like you. Age 22. The Corpse Guilders offered another contract. A different kind of work this time. They needed enforcers for a debt collection. Someone in the lower Underhive owed the guild and wasn't paying. The guild wanted the debt collected, or the debtor made an example. The pay was good, your gang needed the resources, you took the contract. The debtor was a man named Keller, 40 years old, ancient by Underhive standards. He ran a small water reclamation operation, trying to purify toxic water enough to make it drinkable. He'd borrowed from the guild to buy equipment. Couldn't make the payments. The interest had compounded until the debt was impossible. You found him in his operation, a cramped space filled with improvised filtration equipment, pipes and holding tanks. He was there with his family, a wife, 2 children. The children were young, 6 and 8, thin, malnourished. Their eyes were too large in their faces. Keller saw you and your squad, knew immediately why you were there. "Please," he said. "I'm trying. The water is almost clean enough. I can start paying soon. Just give me time." You explained the guild's position. He was 3 months behind. The debt had grown beyond his ability to pay. The guild wanted payment now, or consequences. "I don't have it," Keller said desperately. "Everything I make goes to feeding my family. If I pay the guild, my children starve. If I don't pay, you, what, kill me? Then who runs the operation? Then who makes any payments?" Good question. You didn't have a good answer. The guild didn't care about logic. They cared about examples, about making sure other debtors paid on time, about maintaining the fear that kept their system functioning. You were supposed to break his equipment, destroy his operation, make him an example of what happened when you didn't pay the Corpse Guild. You looked at his children, looked at their thin faces, their desperate eyes. They were watching you with animal fear. They knew you were a threat, knew you were there to hurt their father. They'd probably seen violence before, everyone in the Underhive had. But knowing it was coming for your family was different. You couldn't do it. For the first time in years, you couldn't follow orders, couldn't perpetuate the system. These people were barely surviving. Breaking their operation would kill them, slowly, through starvation, but kill them just as certainly as a bullet. You have 2 weeks, you told Keller. Get caught up by then, or the guild sends someone else, someone who won't talk first. You left. Your squad followed, confused. Back at the common area, one of them asked, "Why didn't we break the equipment? The guild's going to be angry." "Let them be angry," you said. "I'm not destroying a family's livelihood over debt the guild engineered them into. That's not how it works. We took the contract. We have to." "I know how it works. I've lived this life since I was 6 years old. I know exactly how it works, and I'm tired of it. Just once, just this once, we're not going to be the monsters everyone thinks we are." Your squad didn't understand. They'd been raised the same way you had, taught that morality was a luxury, that survival required hardness, that the Underhive's rules were absolute. They couldn't comprehend defying those rules. Risking guild anger for people who weren't even gang members. You couldn't fully explain it yourself. You just knew you couldn't destroy that family. Couldn't look at those children and make them orphans or watch them starve. You'd killed children before. You'd do terrible things to survive. But this was a line you wouldn't cross. Not today. Not for the guild's greed. 2 weeks later, you heard that Keller had scraped together enough payment to satisfy the guild. Barely. He'd probably gone into more debt to do it, but he'd survived. His family survived. You'd given them that chance. It changed nothing. The Underhive continued as it always had. The violence continued. The exploitation continued. One family surviving didn't fix the system. Didn't redeem you. Didn't change what you were. But it was something. A small act of defiance against the grinding horror, a moment where you chose not to be the monster. It felt fragile and pointless, and yet somehow important. Age 23, you were living on borrowed time. You knew it. Everyone knew it. You'd survived 15 years of gang life. That was impossible. That was miraculous. That was terrifying, because it meant your luck was long overdue to run out. You'd started having thoughts you never had before, wondering about alternatives, about escape. Could you leave the Underhive, bribe your way to the upper levels, disappear into the deep darkness, and try to survive alone? All the options ended in death. The upper hives would kill you as an unauthorized Underhiver. The deep darkness was filled with mutants, and worse. Leaving the gang meant losing protection, losing resources, losing everything. There was no escape. There never had been. You were born in the Underhive and you'd die in the Underhive. That was your fate. That was everyone's fate down here. Rake was 15 now, a veteran in his own right. He'd killed 4 people in gang conflicts. He was good with an autogun, quick, reliable. You'd trained him well. He'd survive you, probably, as much as anyone survived down here. One night you told him, "When I die, and it'll be soon, luck doesn't last forever. You take the squad. You lead them. You take care of them." "I don't think it will." "Don't talk like that," Rack said. "You're not dying anytime soon. You're the best fighter we have. Doesn't matter. Down here, skill just means you survive longer before something gets you. Could be tomorrow, could be a year, but it's coming, and when it does, you need to be ready." "I'm not ready. I'm 15. I was 13 when I took over." You're more ready than I was. You know the territories. You know the crew. You know how to keep people alive. That's all leadership is down here. Keeping people alive one more day. Rake was quiet. Then, did Vex tell you the same thing before he died? Yeah. Take care of the crew. Those were his last words. Now I'm telling you. Take care of the crew. It's the only thing that matters down here. The only purpose. The only reason to keep surviving. What if I don't want to? What if I want something else? Then you die wanting something else. The Underhive doesn't care what you want. It only cares that you're useful. Be useful to the crew. Keep them alive. That's all you can do. You sounded like Vex. Like all the older gangers who'd given you the same speeches over the years. Cyclic, repetitive, the same wisdom passed down generation after generation. Because the Underhive never changed. The darkness remained. The violence continued. The survivors perpetuated what had been done to them. Age 23, 3 months later, you noticed patterns. The Corrosion boys had been quiet recently. Too quiet. No border provocations. No skirmishes. Either they were planning something big, or they'd been weakened by conflicts with other gangs. You scouted their territory carefully, took Rake and 2 others, moved through the border zones, watching, listening. The Corrosion boys were there. You saw their patrols, but they seemed distracted, focused, inward. Something was happening in their territory, internal conflict maybe, leadership disputes. You were gathering intelligence when the ambush hit. They'd been waiting, watching. They'd let you penetrate deep into their territory, then surrounded you. 6 gangers, all armed with autoguns. You had 4 people. Bad odds. The first burst of gunfire killed one of your squad immediately. Headshots. Professional. Planned. This wasn't random violence. This was calculated revenge. The Corrosion boys remembered every raid, every loss, every death. They'd been waiting for an opportunity. You'd given it to them. You returned fire, tried to fight toward cover. Rake was beside you, his autogun barking. The other surviving squad member was hit, went down screaming, just you and Rake now, against 6. The fight lasted maybe 3 minutes, felt like hours. You killed 2 Corrosion boys, Rake killed 1, but there were too many, too much firepower, no cover, no support coming, no way to retreat. A round caught you in the side, punched through your armor, tore through your abdomen. You felt it, hot, wrong, devastating. You'd been shot before, grazed, flesh wounds. This was different. This was lethal. You dropped. Hit the ground hard. Your revolver fell from your hand. You tried to reach for it, couldn't. Your body wasn't responding properly. Blood was pooling beneath you. Too much blood, too fast. Rake was screaming, fighting, trying to reach you. You wanted to tell him to run, to save himself, but you couldn't speak. The pain was overwhelming, absolute. A Corrosion boy stood over you, raised his autogun, aimed at your head. Execution shot, standard protocol. Make sure the enemy is dead. In that moment, bleeding out in the darkness, you thought about the 8-year-old kid who'd joined your crew. Rake, who looked up to you, who trusted you, who'd die without your protection. You'd failed him, failed the crew, failed Vex's last command. You were going to die and leave them vulnerable, leave them without leadership, leave them to be killed or absorbed by other gangs. Everything you'd survived for, fought for, killed for, it ended here, in the darkness, in Corrosion boy territory, meaningless death in a meaningless gang war. Your last thought, as the Corrosion boy's finger tightened on the trigger, was absurdly mundane. I never saw the sun. Then, nothing. You are dead. Crix, aged 23, killed in Corrosion boy territory during a failed reconnaissance operation. Your body lies in the darkness, blood pooling around it, cooling in the chemical-tainted air of the Underhive. The corrosion boys leave your corpse. By morning it will be gone, harvested by the desperate or claimed by the corpse gilders, rendered down into protein paste, fed to the next generation. The cycle of the Underhive. Everyone becomes food eventually, even Ganners, even you. But the story doesn't end with your death. It never does in the Underhive. The cycle continues, must continue, because the darkness doesn't care about individual deaths, only about perpetuation, about maintaining the system that grinds humans into meat, and meat into food, and food back into humans. Rake survived your death. Barely. He fought his way out of the ambush, wounded but mobile. He made it back to Bloodied Claw's territory and reported what happened. The gang's leadership accepted the loss. They'd expected it. Everyone died eventually. You'd survived longer than most. Your death was tragic but not surprising. Rake was 15. He inherited your squad by default. He was the most senior surviving member. 4 gangers now, ages 12 to 16, all looking to him for leadership because you were dead and no one else was available. He gave them the same speech you'd given him. The speech Vex had given you, the speech that had been passed down through generations of Bloodied Claws, because the words never changed, and the situation never changed, and the Underhive never changed. Stay sharp. Trust the crew. Don't cross into rival territory without backup. The Underhive kills the careless. Don't be careless. The squad listened, accepted. They had no choice. This was survival, this was life. This was all there was, and all there would ever be. The territorial conflicts continued. The Bloodied Claws raided Corrosion Boy territory in retaliation for your death, killed 3 of theirs. The Corrosion Boys responded with a raid on Bloodied Claws water sources, killed 2. Back and forth, attack and counterattack. The same pattern that had existed for decades, for generations, for as long as anyone could remember. The reasons for the original conflicts were forgotten, lost to time. Nobody remembered what had started the gang wars. They just continued because they'd always continued. Because resources were scarce and territory was valuable, and violence was the only language the Underhive spoke fluently. Rake killed his first person 6 months after your death. A Rust-Eater ganger caught during a border dispute. He did it better than you had, quicker, cleaner. You'd trained him well. He barely hesitated, barely reacted afterward. The Underhive had already hardened him enough that taking a life was just another task. He was 15 and becoming exactly what you had been, what Vex had been, what every ganger became if they survived long enough. A killer, a survivor, a perpetuator of the cycle. A new child joined the Bloodied Claws. 8 years old, skinny, scared, orphaned when his parents died in a hab sanctuary, structural failure in the decaying infrastructure of the Underhive. He had nowhere else to go, no skills, no protection. He'd starve or be killed without gang membership. His name was Tetch. He reminded Rake of himself at that age, of you at that age, of every child who'd ever been recruited into gang life. Desperate, trying to be brave, terrified underneath. Rake took him under protection, taught him the territories, taught him to run messages, taught him to strip and maintain weapons, gave him the same warnings, the same lessons, the same conditional care that you'd given Rake, that Vex had given you, that someone unknown had given Vex. The cycle continued. Generation after generation, children recruited into violence, trained to kill, dying young, being replaced by younger children, forever. In the darkness, the upper hive remained oblivious, 15 kilometers above the Underhive, in the gleaming spires where the nobility lived, they went about their lives in comfort and ignorance. They didn't think about the Underhive, didn't wonder about the people below. To them, the Underhive was a source of labor and resources, a place where the unwanted went, not worthy of consideration beyond its utility. Sometimes, when production quotas weren't met, when unrest threatened the mid-hive levels, the upper hive would order compliance sweeps. Enforcers would descend into the Underhive and kill indiscriminately, restore order through overwhelming violence, then retreat to the surface, their duty done. The Underhive temporarily cowed. These sweeps killed hundreds, sometimes thousands, gang members, civilians, children, everyone. The enforcers didn't discriminate, couldn't discriminate. Down in the darkness, everyone looked the same. Everyone was equally disposable. Rake survived 2 compliance sweeps, lost squad members in both. Learned to hide when enforcers descended. Learned to recognize the warning signs. Learned that the upper hive saw underhivers as vermin to be occasionally culled, not citizens to be protected. The realization didn't surprise him. He'd been born in the Underhive. He'd never expected protection from above, never expected the Imperium to care. The Imperium was a distant concept. The god Emperor was a name invoked in prayers, but never manifested in reality. Down here, in the darkness, there was no divine protection, no imperial justice. Just survival and violence and the endless grinding of the machine. Age 16, Rake was a veteran. He'd survived 3 years of leadership, lost half his original squad, recruited new members, fought in 6 major gang conflicts, killed 9 people in personal combat, countless more in firefights where individual kills couldn't be tracked. He barely remembered the child he'd been, the scared 8-year-old who'd joined the gang. That person felt like someone else, someone softer, someone who hadn't yet understood what the Underhive required. Now he understood. Completely, intimately. He was a killer, a survivor, a leader of killers. He kept his squad alive by being harder, faster, more ruthless than his enemies, by making good tactical decisions, by knowing when to fight and when to retreat, by being exactly what you had taught him to be. Tetch was 10 now, running messages, learning the territories, being groomed for full gang membership. Soon he'd be required to make his kill, prove himself, join the cycle officially. Rake would give him a knife and point at a captured enemy and make him understand, this is what survival costs. This is the price. This is the only way. Rake hated it, just as you had hated it, just as Vex probably had hated it. But he'd do it anyway, because the alternative was letting the gang weaken, letting resources slip away, letting everyone die faster. Age 18, Rake took a contract from the corpse guilders. Body harvesting, plague zone. The same work you'd done, at the same age. The work was terrible, disgusting, dangerous, but it paid well. The gang needed resources, needed guild favor, needed everything the contract offered. Rake lost a squad member to plague infection, had to shoot the boy himself before the infection spread. The boy was 12, had a name Rake immediately forgot because remembering made it harder, made it hurt more. Better to just forget, turn it into another statistic. Another necessary death in the endless catalogue of necessary deaths. The Underhive had made Rake exactly what it needed him to be, just as it had made you, just as it made everyone who survived long enough. Efficient killers with just enough humanity left to feel horror, but not enough to stop perpetuating the system. Age 19, Rake had outlived you. He'd survived 16 years of Underhive life, 13 as an active gang member. This was rare. This was miraculous. This was terrifying because it meant his luck was running out. He started having the same thoughts you'd had. about escape, about alternatives, about whether there was any way to break the cycle. The answer was always the same: no. The Underhive didn't let go. You were born in the darkness, and you died in the darkness. The cycle was absolute. Tech was 15 now, a full gang member. He'd made his kill 3 years ago, proven himself. He was good with weapons, fast, smart. Rake had trained him well. When Rake died, and it would be soon, everyone's luck ran out. Tech would take over, would lead the squad, would perpetuate the cycle. One night, Rake told him, "When I die, you take the crew, you keep them alive. That's all that matters down here. Just keep them alive one more day." Tech nodded, accepted. He'd heard this speech before, expected it. The passing of responsibility from one generation to the next, the continuation of leadership in the endless war. "Did Crix tell you the same thing?" Tech asked. Yeah. And his brother Vex told him. And someone told Vex. It goes back forever. The words never change because the situation never changes. This is what we are. This is what we do. We survive, and we train the next generation to survive. And they do the same forever. Is there ever anything else? Any other purpose? No. This is it. This is all there is. The Underhive doesn't offer alternatives. Just survival. Just the cycle. Accept it or die fighting it. Those are the only choices. Tech was quiet for a long time. Then, "I accept it. When you're gone, I'll take care of the crew. I'll keep them alive. I'll train the next generation. Just like you did. Just like Crix did. Just like everyone does." "Good," Rake said. "That's all I can ask." He sounded exactly like you, like Vex, like every leader who'd ever given this speech in the countless gangs scattered throughout the Underhive. The words were the same because the truth was the same. The cycle was eternal. Age 20, Rake died in an ambush. Rust Eaters caught him during a patrol. He fought well, killed 3 of them, but there were too many. Too much firepower, no backup, no escape. He died in the darkness, bleeding out on corroded metal, and his last thought was of Tech, the 15-year-old who would inherit his squad, who would perpetuate the cycle, who would die the same way eventually. Meaningless death in meaningless gang war, in the darkness 15 kilometers below a city that didn't know he existed. Tech survived, took over the squad, gave the same speeches, fought the same wars, recruited new children, trained them to kill, watched them die. Survived longer than expected, died eventually, was replaced by someone younger who did exactly the same things. The cycle continued, generation after generation, century after century. In the Underhive of Hive Primus on Necromunda, in the darkness 15 kilometers below the surface, where the sun was a myth and violence was currency and human life was cheaper than ammunition. The gangs continued their wars, the Blooded Claws, the Corrosion Boys, the Rust Eaters, the Skinner crew, and hundreds of others, fighting for territory, for water, for food, for pride, for reasons they'd forgotten, for reasons that didn't matter. Just fighting, because that's what gangs did, what they'd always done, what they'd always do. The corpse guilders continued processing bodies. The desperate continued eating whatever they could find. The upper hive continued not caring. The Imperium continued grinding humanity into meat and calling it civilization. And children continued being recruited into gangs. 8 years old, scared, desperate, trying to survive in a darkness that offered only violence and death and the slim chance of seeing tomorrow. Your name was Crix. You died at 23. You never saw the sun. You killed dozens of people. You trained children to kill. You perpetuated a cycle of violence that had existed for generations and would continue for generations more. You were not special. You were not unique. You were just another child consumed by the Underhive, just another killer made necessary by impossible circumstances, just another corpse rendered down into protein paste to feed the next generation. The cycle continues, forever, in the darkness, beneath the notice of the Imperium you never saw, in the hell you were born into and could never escape. This is the brutal reality of growing up in an Underhive gang in Warhammer 40K. Not adventure, not glory, not meaning, just survival, just violence, just the grinding, eternal cycle of children recruited into gangs, trained to kill, killing, dying, and being replaced by younger children who do exactly the same thing. Forever. In the darkness, where the sun is a myth, and hope is a lie, and death is the only certainty. The Underhive doesn't care. It just consumes. Always, everyone, eventually. You were born in the darkness. You killed in the darkness. You died in the darkness. And in the darkness, the cycle continues. Forever.